Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak. I think one of the great things about the Oncofertility Consortium and Dr. Woodruff has been that, we talk a lot, I think, in academic medicine about three pillars, the research, the clinical care, and the education. But I think a lot of times the education arm of things is sort of seen as an adjunct rather than a true primary goal. And we are really grateful for the opportunity in so many ways in the Oncofertility Consortium to see that sort of in its own right. So. What we're going to talk about today, just briefly, is really just update you all on what are some of the education strategies that we have been working on over the last few years. I'm going to start with the first half, talking a little bit about the work that we've done over the last few years and the output from that work, which is now generally available to anybody who is interested. And then we thought it would be fun in the second half to take you guys back, since for many of you, not all of you, because I think there are some students in the audience, but for many of us, it's been a while since we were in school, to talk a little bit about some of the principles and pedagogy behind adult learning, and we might actually make you do a little as well. Okay, all in 25 minutes. So let's start with the beginning. So in education work, one of the key principles is this idea that before you start teaching somebody something, you have to figure out whether there is actually a need for them to learn that thing that you think is important to teach them. And the term for that is called a needs assessment. And so really the idea is before you go build a curriculum or before you go design some intervention that you want to give to a group of people, really do the background work to see is there a need, and if so, what is the need, and three, to characterize that need better. So that's really where we started this back in, I guess it would be 2014. And very apropos, it was actually started by a trainee. So I was at the University of Iowa at the time, and one of our fellows there, Lisa Kickingham, had the idea to do essentially a version of a needs assessment in research in a research fashion. So she designed a survey study that we conducted at that time of OBGYN fellows. So we focused on reproductive endocrinology as well as gynecologic oncology, thinking that these were the two groups of people who may have a high rate of seeing patients who were candidates for fertility preservation, trying to answer the question, is there a need for formal fellowship training in fertility preservation? And I'm just bringing some highlights from that initial study to here. We saw that about half, a little less than half of fellows, current fellow candidates, there was about 75 respondents who felt that their current level of knowledge was adequate to counsel patients about fertility preservation. About 2/3 or almost 70% felt that they needed more education in fertility preservation, and the overwhelming majority were interested in that educational process being a standardized, formal part of their fellowship training. So this culminated in a manuscript that we put out a few years later. The survey was accompanied by sort of a mixed method study where we also conducted individual interviews to try to flesh out the data a little bit more and some of the needs a little bit more. And basically what we found, in addition to some of the information I showed on the last slide, was that there was also a lot of heterogeneity, program to program and discipline to discipline. And remember, this is just REIs and GYN oncologists, where we felt like, ascertained that in the GYN oncology world, there was even less comfort with fertility preservation than there was in the REI world. And if you extrapolate that beyond OBGYN to pediatrics or hematology oncology or even pediatric endocrine, as we've been hearing all meeting, I would anticipate that many of the same trends hold. So, after that initial needs assessment, that prompted the second step to us, which was basically a roundtable discussion that we held at this meeting in 2015, and some of the people in the audience were there. And the goals therefore at that meeting were basically three. Number one is we wanted to really get all the players, the stakeholders, to the actual table, actually, in this case, to discuss what are the aims of our curriculum, what is the content that this curriculum should hold, and then how should this curriculum ideally be implemented, given that this is multidisciplinary, national, international, and across a multitude of programs. So this is Lisa Cookingham, Lakshmi Kondapalli was there, as well as myself, as well as many people in the audience. And today I'm just going to focus on the third point, which is is the formats for implementation that was a product of that discussion. So in our original survey, there were basically three main arenas that people had ideas as to how they would like to see a formal curriculum implemented. About half ideally would have liked didactic lectures led by faculty at their own training program. A quarter were interested in self-directed learning, and another quarter were interested in sort of a centralized, intensive educational experience. And so when we took these survey results and led them to the roundtable, we were trying to figure out, okay, for each of these ideas, how could we potentially implement that into a curriculum? Didactic lectures by faculty of the program is a tough one to standardize, other than just sort of coming up with a standardized curriculum that we then distributed to individual programs for them to administer on their own. Self-directed learning was a little bit easier given the advent of virtual curricula in medical education at large, and so that was fairly easy to brainstorm into sort of an interactive online curricula. And then an intensive educational course experience was also fairly easy to brainstorm. We talked about sort of linking it to one of these other major meetings, whether it be ASRM or Oncofertility Consortium, and doing this on an annual or biennial basis. In the end, the group decided to focus on the second two, and with the reason being is that even though the majority of people would have loved to have a formal fertility preservation curriculum at their home institution, obviously the surveys also showed that that was not happening, and it makes it much harder for us to standardize curricula and also to enforce implementation when it is truly decentralized at each institution. So we decided to focus instead on the second and third place survey results to see how we could implement that at large. So that brought us to our first output over the last 3 years, which was an air learning certificate course. This was housed in what was at that time the ASRM e-learning platform, now renamed the Air Learning platform, and our course is called Principles of Fertility Preservation for Reproductive Healthcare Providers. It is a certificate course. It contains 12 separate modules, and at the end of the completion of the entire course, there is a certificate that's granted. One of the really neat things about this that we were very pleased with is that this was truly a collaboration between the Oncofertility Consortium and ASRM. And what that meant practically was that this course, unlike most courses on the ASRM e-learning or Air Learning platform, is free not only to ASRM members, but to anyone. And that was one of the very big, big wins that we felt, given the multidisciplinary nature of the learning that's required in fertility preservation. So whether you're an oncologist, whether you're a pediatrician, whether you're a urologist, anyone can go to the ASRM e-learning Air Learning platform, register for this course, and take it. You do not need to be an ASRM member, and that was a big, that we were very grateful to the ASRM leadership for supporting us in that endeavor. So the course itself was designed in conjunction with a lot of the brainstorming that we did at that original roundtable. We structured it to sort of mirror the flow of a patient through this process. So there's a few modules on pre-treatment counseling, looking at how the initial fertility preservation consultation, creation of the fertility preservation team, what is the toxicity of chemotherapy and radiation, and what other conditions, non-oncologic conditions, might this apply to. We then had a section on treatment options for fertility preservation, looking at ovarian stimulation protocols, egg freezing, conservative surgical treatment for gynecologic malignancies, and use of GnRH agonists. Then we moved into post-treatment counseling and survivorship, and then had separate sections on male fertility preservation and ethics of fertility preservation, many of the topics that had been discussed today. The other thing that's worth pointing out in this course is that some of these modules were already in existence, and so what we did was, rather than reinvent the wheel, if ASRM already had an excellent module, for example, on oocyte cryopreservation, we incorporated that into our course. Other modules, about a little more than half, were created de novo for this course by many people in the room here right now. Lakshmi created one, Julie Stroger created one, and then many others in this room peer-reviewed them. Each module had to be peer-reviewed by 2 other experts in the field. So thank you for all of the participants. And then so far, we have a little this rolled out in November, December of last year, of 2017. So we have data on just over, I guess when we wrote this, about 9 months of data. So if in the first 9 months, there have been about 770 course registrants, about half international and half from the United States. To date, only about 75 of those have completed all 12 modules, but hopefully that will continue to increase as time goes on. A little bit about demographics of who's completing them. About half are physicians, 20% are RNs, and 30% are others. Could be students, researchers, et cetera. And then moving on from the virtual curriculum portion, the other part that Wendy and I have been very involved in over the last 3 years is creating this one-time intensive learning experience at what is now the Oncofertility Consortium Fellow Education Day. It's taken different iterations over the last 3 years, but for this year, these are the individuals that have been very intimately involved with this. Leslie Apaya from Ohio State, Jim, of course, who you just heard from, Jackie Jerus, and of course, Dr. Woodruff. And the thing about the Fellow Education Day is even though each of these individuals is tasked with speaking about some of their expertise, that is not the bulk of how we run the day. This is a little different this year in that we're having the Fellow Education Day tomorrow rather than at the beginning of the meeting. So for those of you who will come to it, those trainees who will come to it, it is actually a true mix between some short didactic sessions by some of the individuals who I just spoke with, interspersed with really what's called team-based learning. And we're going to talk, Wendy's going to talk a lot more about that in the second half of our presentation this morning. As of last year, we did achieve some of the goals that we were hoping for in the Fellow Education Day, namely to really make it a multi-specialty experience. Yes, the majority, about half, are from reproductive endocrinology, but last year, and these demographics change a little year to year, we had a mix between medical oncology, peds and adolescent GYN, surgical oncology, radiation oncology, researchers, et cetera, and then also mixed with respect to levels of training. So these are for people who are newer to the field, but that may be fellows, it may be residents, students. We even had some early level faculty or even mid-level faculty in other years who are new to the field of oncofertility and wanting to get a little bit of a primer in that. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to Wendy to.
Thank you. So I'll be introing principles of adult learning and then describing our format, team-based learning, TBL. So there are 3 basic principles of adult learning. In brief, adults prefer to learn through problem solving, not surprising. Adults also prefer to learn through experiences. They like to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, but ideally in a safe environment with low stakes. And the third component is that the content should be relevant to their training or their career goals. So team-based learning, or TBL, is a evidence-based teaching strategy that builds on those 3 principles of adult learning. It was first described in 1970. It was widely implemented in the 80s and 90s, studied in the 90s and 2000s, and there were many reports of success coming from Masters of Business Administration program, or MBA programs. That caught the attention of medical educators who have adapted this strategy and implemented it widely in first and second year curriculums at med schools across the country, including our respective institutions. So we assume that few of you have experienced TBL learning, so we thought it'd be helpful to explain what the steps are. There are 3 steps. One that occurs before class related to preparation, an in-class step that's focused on readiness assessment, and then the bulk of the classroom experience is through application exercises. So prior to class, learners are instructed to complete a short reading of an article or lecture slides or view a video. And that step is typically done in curriculums where there will be a lecture delivered. Oftentimes those lectures will cover the material in the pre-reading or expand on it. Where TBL differs is the classroom time is active learning, and the learners also held accountable to have completing the preparation. So for all the fellows in the audience, you've received some prep work. We picked out Sentinel articles. We hope that you've had a chance to read them. If not, you have some time tonight for class tomorrow. Typically, when a learner enters the classroom in a TBL format, they complete what's called an Individual Readiness Assurance Test, an IRAT. It can be multiple choice questions that are in paper format or electronic format, typically 5 to 20 questions that are pulled directly from the preparation content. In the next 10 minutes of the classroom session, the learners will be in groups, and these groups are constructed by the facilitator. Typically, the facilitator collects demographic information about their learners. Like in our case, we know like what year of fellowship or training an individual is, what their discipline is, are they US or international. So we construct groups of 6 learners that come from various backgrounds and expertise so that they can share in their knowledge. So the group then typically goes through the same 5 to 20 multiple choice questions as a team. And that format sounds redundant because you've just read it, you just did individual questions, like why go through the pain of going through them as a group? But what the literature shows is that this is like one of the strengths of this curriculum. It allows high performers to become more confident in their knowledge. It solidifies that they know what they're talking about and they can serve as a teacher to their peers. And it allows low performers a chance to like make mistakes, learn, practice, and get ready for the bulk of the classroom experience, which is application exercise. So high performers, typically, they can learn in with any strategy. It's really the low performers that medical educators are focused on. And this is one of the clearer strategies that can help improve performance among students in the bottom 10th percentile. So there's some catchy ways you can get the results of the multiple choice questions. There are TBL cards that can be purchased online that are like basically like scratch tickets. They have like the numbers and the letters. So if question 1, the answer is A, the group uses a coin to like scratch off that spot. And if there's a star there, they get positively reinforced that they picked the right answer. If the box is empty, they were wrong. So then typically there's a couple minutes for the facilitator to clarify. Sometimes groups will have disagreements. They don't think the question was clear or that the answer that the facilitator chose is wrong. So then moving into the third step is really the bulk of how the time is spent. Normally the in-class, like IRAT, TRAT, or GRAT, as it's sometimes called, typically take like 20 minutes. So the rest of the session, be it 40 minutes or an hour and a half, is used on cases. And this is where this format works particularly well for medicine. Cases such as clinical vignettes can be adapted to this format. It has to be a significant problem. All the groups in the room simultaneously work on the same problem. And the questions that follow the vignette are typically written as multiple choice with A through E answer choices where possibly more than one could be correct. And then there is group discussion that's facilitated through simultaneously reporting. So just to explain how that works, I planted some cards in the audience. So if you don't mind, hold them up. Okay, so each one corresponds with like a letter. So if Divya and I were like working this room, I would like call on that group over there and see, why did you pick B? And perhaps call on this group over here and ask why they chose A. And then we can really figure out why some groups arrived at different answers quite quickly, and this is low technology. So, okay, so we modified the format of traditional TBL for Fellows Day. As I mentioned, we do assign prep work in the form of Sentinel articles and ASRM practice bulletins, and we have considered assigning our AirLearn modules, but we've not made that step yet. We have chose to omit the IRAT-GRAT component, the assessment that I just described, because we also have in-class preparation, because we have experts at our fingertips that can give high-yield talks. And between the reading and the talks, the groups are ready to focus on the application exercise. So our course starts tomorrow at 8. We'll be done by 3. There's an hour for lunch. We have 4 short talks, and we'll probably spend a good 2 hours on problem solving. And again, that's the core of this meeting is collaborating, learning how to collaborate. So in our pre-constructed learning groups, we'll allow the learners to work through these problems, to discuss their own expertise and come to a best answer. And then Divya and I will facilitate the discussion using the simultaneous reporting technique we just showed you. Okay. So we thought it'd be fun in the last 5 minutes to do a brief exposure to a component of the TBL activity. We were going to have you work through an IRAT and a GRAT, and then do just a second on facilitated discussion. So don't panic. You did not miss any homework assignments because we're going to use brain teasers, so we feel that you've already done the prep work in grade school. And we'll ask you, I'll show you the brain teaser on the next slide. I'm only going to flash it up there and read it once. Just go with your gut response or your first answer, write it down, make a commitment. There's going to be 3. And then after we go through all 3, then I'm going to ask you to talk to your neighbor. I'll show the 3 brain teasers again. See if your answers change after your discussion. And then to do our simultaneously reporting in this context, we want you to hold up the number with your finger that corresponds with your answer. So if your answer is number 1, you will hold up 1 finger. If your answer is number 4, you will hold up 4 fingers. And that will allow Divya and I to get a quick assessment.
They're all numeric.
They're all numeric answers. Okay? Okay. So any questions? Okay. All right. So the first brain teaser. You are a participant in a race. You overtake the second person. What position are you in? Just go with your first answer. This is your individual. Commit. Okay. Our second brain teaser. If it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 objects, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 objects? Go with your first answer. Okay, and our final brain teaser. A cup and teapot set costs $110. The teapot costs $100 more than the cup. How much is a cup? Okay. Okay, so now partner up with a neighbor. Now you're going to do the group part. So that was the individual. Okay. So to facilitate your group discussion, I'm just going to show you the brain teaser one more time. All right, wrap up your group discussions.
Time's up, time's up.
We're going to come back as the large group. And to stay on time, we'll ask you to wrap up your discussions. We'll come back to the large group. And now we're going to do the fun part, which is the facilitated discussion. So for the first brain teaser, you are a participant in a race. You overtake the second person. What position are you in? Okay, hold up your fingers that show us your, okay. So we see lots of 2s. Okay, great. Okay, so everyone's in agreement. So the answer is the second position, okay. For the second brain teaser, if it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 objects, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 objects? Okay, we got some 5s. That's the correct answer. Way to go. 2 for 2. Okay. And then final A cup and a teapot set cost $110. The teapot costs $100 more than the cup. How much is a cup? Okay, some 5s and 10s. So
let me ask an honest question now. How many of you honestly changed your answer, changed any of these 3 answers in the group discussion? Raise your hand. Like at least half the room,
Yeah.
right? So
there's,
we always like to point this out.
Yes.
What is the point of this? The point of this is these are pretty easy questions. There's actually like a right answer, there's a wrong answer. We all get it wrong even though, they are pretty easy questions. And think about this as compared to the questions that we actually are tackling, right, in this meeting. These are not easy questions. Half of Jim Smith's cases or Courtney and Emily's cases, they're really hard questions. And so the point of this exercise is that when you come to hard, interdisciplinary questions without clear answers, the value of the group discussion, both thinking about it individually and then coming together and thinking about it as a group, elevates accordingly.
Yeah. So our last point is just to plug that with Teresa's oversight, Divya and I had the opportunity to co-edit an upcoming publication, the Textbook of Oncofertility Research and Practice, and we believe it will be published in 2019. It has chapters that are based on topics, and there's also chapters that are based on these messy clinical cases that many of you in the room contributed, and we enjoyed reading to see how complicated your day-to-day practices truly are. So we hope that you'll enjoy that publication. And really, we'd like to thank so many in the room, not only for your time, but for your financial support, particularly the Society for Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility, as they've been kind enough to provide $5,000 in travel scholarships for REI fellows to attend the Fellows Day for the past 3 years. We've also been grateful to ASRM. As Divya said, they made the e-learn course free, not only to ASRM members, but to any interested learner. And obviously, we thank Dr. Woodruff for the opportunities that she's given us to sort of highlight what a focus on education can bring to the table. So thank you.